You're back for another weekly edition of Crosby and Texas Government. By this point, we're entering week 12, so bi-weekly number 6 is coming available. Also, for those students that are on the policy presentation, keep in mind you really need to have that done and put in before finals week. So any student that's on the A route, make sure you're kind of looking at that. If you need to be contacted, I've already had several contact me, working through your ideas and kind of figuring it out. But if you're just now getting started on that, really, it does require a lot of work. So make sure you're kind of taking care of that, communicating with me as you need to get that in beforehand. Otherwise, just make sure you're keeping your grades up. The biweekly assessment number 6 is coming out. Chapter assessments, remember there's 10 of them. Most of them should be completed by now, all the way through Unit 3. We just have a few more weeks left before we wrap for the semester, and so really make sure you have that kind of diligence to make sure you're getting your work in. For those of y'all on the B route, make sure you're getting the supplemental reading assignment as well. And so it's a couple things to look at as we get closer and closer to the end of the semester. I've got on the board here the bureaucracy. Just as a reminder, we did talk about the bureaucracy extensively before I left class, but it is worth kind of reviewing the notes. They're all online. If you want to look at just a reminder on whatever we do by law, it has to be carried out in some way, fashion, or form. And so a lot of times we're very, very excited about going into this narrative of saying, yes, we want to do this, we want this law, but every law has to have some type of tangible execution of law on the back end of it. And so a lot of times where we may have a good idea, it's not always clear how that idea manifests when it actually is carried out. And so this is where the bureaucracy really kind of comes into play. This is the actual carrying out of the law, whatever that may mean. And so a lot of times what sounds good in idea isn't always the great idea when it comes to actually making it happen. We talked about this in class again. This idea that all we have to do is create a perfect law with the perfect execution, and then the government will work the way we want it to. And the reality is many times we don't have a perfect law, mostly because we don't have a perfect execution or a way to perfectly execute it, especially if you're given into a government where you have some type of protection of individual rights and allowance of freedom. There's just a lot of variables in play that make what otherwise would be efficient measures of government non-practical, or not realistic, without assuming full power over your people. Now, if you want to move to China and have an absolutist type government, or Russia with a dictatorial type government, then yeah, you can put in the hands of government to do whatever they please, and passing law and executing law becomes more efficient, but you also suppress the rights of your people in the process. And so we kind of have to balance this out and realize just the oppressive nature of law when it comes into the execution of the law and how we play that out. And so just a kind of reminder on the bureaucracy and what it is. Again, a lot of stuff we already went over here. What I want to focus on this week is really kind of coming down to Texas localities. And Texas localities are going to be unique primarily because they hold the power of the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judiciary, but on a local level. Their power does not extend beyond their borders. And so every locality is going to have a certain legislative power, executive power, and judicial power within their localities. And a lot of these localities are ones we don't really know or understand. Now, the obvious ones are counties. We have Bell County and Coryell County locally, and they carry certain powers and authority. They tax you. But we also have Killeen Independent School District. We have CTC Independent School District, or community college district there. You have municipal districts. You have local, like I said, municipal districts, was going to get into Killeen, Harker Heights, Nolanville, those kind of areas. All of these that are going to take some element of taxation and provide some element of benefit. And so when you look at localities, there's always a trade-off between, right, the individual citizen living in that area is going to give something in the form of a tax or a fee to that entity, and that entity is going to return some collective benefit. And once again, whatever that organization may be, not all taxes are bad, not all fees are bad. The question is, what are you getting for what price? And this is where you really need to know about your localities and how they're run. You're getting a certain tangible benefit for a price. And the problem is most people are unaware of these. They're not familiar with what they look like or how they operate. operate. And so we kind of have these spats municipal or at a municipal level or a smaller local level where most people really don't have any idea what it is they're fighting. And so we need to take a moment and look at just how these localities manifest. So the common characteristic of government is hyper-individualistic. And so we have this common characteristics that all governments are extensions of the state. And so the state exists as kind of this larger unifying element of all local governments. And so this kind of idea that these localities are going to have similarities in play on how they're going to be developed and run and manifest, but they're not going to be the same. So what we have in Texas is we have a lot of different forms, and we're going to see similarities and we're going to see differences depending on how low of a form we get. And I'll explain all that as we go. So underneath the state government, the broadest form of government is what we call county governments. In Texas, we have 254 counties, so we have 254 county governments. These county governments are going to be responsible for a host of governing elements, which include they operate county courts. This is one of the biggest roles. County jails and whatnot are going to fall into this kind of county element. Public health and public health records are both going to get into this. A lot of your birth certificates, death certificates, stuff like that is regulated and maintained at the county level. They're going to collect funds. A lot of times where you pay your taxes through the state, or not through the state, but through the counties, even to other localities like Killeen Independent School District, you don't actually pay it to KISD. You pay it to the county, and then the county distributes that to KISD. So they kind of have this fund collecting agency. Conduct elections. Like I said, we have no national elections. All the elections happen locally, and so it's really your county officials that are in charge of managing your elections, conducting those elections. It's also one of the biggest reasons why election fraud continues to be such a hot button issue, because different counties have different funding structures and different counties have different elements, and it's not incredibly difficult to see how some smaller counties or less funded counties may have gaps in the security of their elections. And so we see that. Negotiating powers, working jointly, operating jails, maintaining roads. All of these are prospects of the counties. And if you look over here at the map, I think what's interesting is roads are one of my favorite examples of understanding federalism when you actually look from a perspective of federal, county, and state, whatnot. If I'm looking over here, I have these interstate highways, like Highway 35 or 14. These are interstate because they cross state borders, so they're actually controlled by the federal government. Beyond that, I have Texas state highways. And then after the Texas state highways, so like Texas Highway 36 here, I have these, and they always have a state of Texas. If that's a Texas state highway, it's run, managed, and financed by the state. But when you get off on these little things, you have what's called farm-to-market roads. And the farm-to-market roads are FM roads. Most of those are county roads that are paid for by the county level. They're organized by the county level, whatnot. Now, those county roads are really going to be up to par based on the relative value, or not relative, but the relative income of the county. Not every county is financed the same, because counties are going to pull in their finances from the available tax revenue. And even though we have 254 counties, not every county has equal population or equal funding. Even though all the counties are set up the same and have the same requirements, the level of funding, the number of people they serve is astronomically different. We'll look at that here in a little bit. In general, every county is set up this way. County voters are going to sit at the top of the controlling agency of all counties. Underneath that county, the county is going to be divided into 4 precincts, and every county precinct is going to have a commissioner. So look at this as kind of like the representative for your area, right? The head of the county commission is known as the county judge, which confuses everyone because the county judge is not a judge in the traditional sense of the judge. He is kind of like the chief officer of the commissioner court, but the court is not a judicial court. It's a legislative court. It's charged with kind of making the rules and legislation and deciding what is going to be the day-to-day function of the county. And so when you look at the commissioner's court, the commissioner court sounds like it's carrying a judicial function, when in actuality it carries a legislative function. And this is what's so important to understand the differences between a legislative power and executive power and a judiciary, so you know exactly what power is vested where, because names are really, really confusing sometimes. I didn't do it. Don't blame me. But yes, we have confused a lot of students for a lot of time because we don't name things what we should. So the legislative power of the county is really in the county commissioner court. They are the one that's going to sit there and decide how to spend county money, what to do with county management, whatnot. The executive function are going to be in these over here that actually carry out the will of the court on the day-to-day elements. They're going to be the ones that are going to carry out the different elements about tax collection. They're going to manage and oversee county departments and whatnot. And so we have different elements of the county that are going to be hired by the county to manage county affairs on a day-to-day basis. The county also has a judicial function with the district judge, the justice of the peace, and the constable. They are going to carry out what we would consider more of a judicial function of settling disputes and carrying out the legal element of if there's disputes against the counties or if two people are getting into conflict within the county, there's going to be an element there as well. So we're going to have county court, but the county court is different from the commissioner's court, which is a county court. And so we have to keep in mind what are we talking about when we get into the areas of the county. Now, like I said, every county is going to be set up the same. So it doesn't matter what county you go into. The county voters that live in that area are going to be selecting the precinct commissioners in their area, and then the entire county gets to count for the judge. The judge then becomes kind of like the chief of the court and also kind of like this head over some of this other extension. But like I said, it's really these lower level bureaucrats and whatnot that carry the day-to-day form of the counties. And so when you get into the county management, it really can get confusing really quickly on who exactly does what and how they operate. And even though they're structured the same, just like the plural executive, depending on the personalities in play and the commissioners in play, you could see a different dynamic within each county. And so it's important to kind of keep this in mind of just this general construct of how the counties are developed. Here we are in Bell County, and as you see, Bell County is divided into 4 different precincts, and every precinct has roughly the same number of people in it. Then together, Bell County creates a county judge. And so this kind of element of how we split it and how we have representation, that all happens on a voting. And so you actually go and you can vote in these county elections. And a lot of people, like I said, simply don't know about them. They don't pay attention to them. They don't see them. Of all the elections we have, these elections are by far the most, or the least rather, attended. Most people are unaware of them. We get caught up in the presidential election, but we really don't see a lot of what's happening in the county. The other big thing is county finance becomes a big issue. When you look at, not all counties are going to be, the same when it comes financially. So counties are primarily financed based on property taxes. When you get into property taxes, you have to look at 2 variables within every property tax. You have to look at how valuable the homes are and then how those homes are being taxed. So counties with a high tax rate don't always produce the highest level of payment, because if I have a high tax rate but property valuations are really low, then the marginal outcome of that rate is going to be somewhere in the middle. So I have to look at a place that has a high medium home value with a high effective tax rate, and those are the ones that are going to produce the highest levels of revenue for their county governments. And so we see that kind of on those. You see some of the bigger counties having, so you've got to kind of look at this. And also when you move into a county, it's important to understand that counties do change and fluctuate based on the relative taxes in those counties, because every county is going to have different things going on in that county. There's going to be different districts that you're paying money to depending on where you actually go. And so this is important because depending on where you buy a house, that house is going to be covered within a district, which is why so much of this works on your address. Wherever your address is, that address is included in a handful of things, and all of those handful of things are going to pull money based on the valuation of your home. And so as we go smaller than the counties, we're looking at municipalities. Municipalities come in two forms. We have home rule, and then we have what's called constitutional or general law cities. Now, the general rule of thumb is this: any city that has 5,000 or more tries to declare as a home rule, and to do that, they have to petition the state to govern themselves, and then they can create their own city charter and run their affairs as long as they're not in violation of the Texas Constitution. I'm simplifying this overwhelmingly, but it is what it is. The other cities that are less than 5,000 are what's called general law cities, and general law cities, correct that, all kind of have the same thing in mind, where they're governed based on a general construct that's laid forth in the Texas Constitution of 1876. And so a lot of things, when you look at municipalities, it really is kind of like a critical turning point for all municipalities to hit this 5,000 number. Because once you hit the 5,000 number, then you can effectively begin governing yourself. You can kind of build the nature of your government the way you want. You can set it up the way you want. Again, within the general framework allowed by the Texas Constitution. But you get a break out of this kind of like general nature of what we call a general law cities. And so what I have here, it's a general kind of definition of it, where you can see that a general law city is a city whose power are limited by the specific authority because of the population. So the lower the population, you kind of are under state authority. A home rule city is a city that has a population over 5,000. And once you hit that one, then you can petition to really set up your own charter. Now, you still have to get the people in your area to approve of your charter. You still have to get your charter approved by the state. But so many municipalities in Texas are what we call home rule. They're actually governing themselves. They have their own charters depending on the city. And we have other cities like Salado, which is a village, not technically a municipality, and that matters because the technical things on what villages are allowed compared to other general law cities. And so a lot of this gets into the legality of what is and what is not allowed by virtue of the Texas Constitution. And so depending on where you go and where you live, that city, that municipality, that village may have a different governing setup. So you can't move from Killeen to Lampasas and assume that the taxes are going to be the same, the setup's going to be the same, the organizational structure is going to be the same, or even the laws are going to be the same. There are some things that you can get in trouble for in Nolanville that are completely acceptable in Gatesville. And so you really have to kind of pay attention to the nuances that really do manifest on the local level because of our ability to do this. Now, what I'm going to go over now are the three general ways that we see the voters set up cities. Now, these can be modified, they can be moved, and so what I'm going to give you is just a general framework, and every individual city is going to be somewhere within this framework, so please, please, please do not take these as absolute. These are kind of guidelines, but you can kind of see within every city a general model that emerges in that city. The first model we see here is a mayor-council form with a weak mayor. In the mayor-council form, the mayor is kind of working with the kind of city council, but is a separate executive. So in a mayor-council form, the mayor acts independent of the council. So the voters elect here a kind of executive body that all comes to the voter, and the voters also elect separately a city council. So in this iteration, the mayor actually has a separate electoral, a separate role, a separate power from the city council. However, the mayor's responsibility is primarily an executive responsibility. And so the mayor then runs the bureaucracy of the city, but notice these dotted lines over here. That means that the city council has oversight or approval of all of the mayor's appointments, managements, decisions, depending on how the contract or the how the charter is written. The city council could have oversight on almost every decision the mayor makes, depending on, again, how the charter is written. So in a weak mayor form, the mayor is separate from the council, and the council has oversight of what the mayor does. Well, as you can guess, you also have a mayor-council form with a strong mayor. And a strong mayor, once again, has that separation where the city council is elected on one side, the mayor is selected on the other side, but notice a difference here. The mayor really then has far more direct control over the executive bureaucracy, over the management of the state. If I go back to the weak mayor, notice that the mayor is kind of like the plural executive. They are just one of many different independently elected voters, and most of the decisions that they make are overseen by the council. Whereas a strong mayor is going to have more of a direct control over the entire executive agency of the city. And this is really important to understand, that these are simply guidelines. You can have a relatively weak mayor, you can have a relatively strong mayor, you can have somewhere in the middle. These are just kind of like, if you move into a new Texas city, if you want to understand who has the power within that city, you really need to look at their charter to look at, okay, where's the mayor? Who has the power? Where is the lawmaking authority? Where is the executive authority? How are these manifest within my city? Right? In this world, the legislative county has a lot of legislative authority. The mayor has a lot of executive authority. And depending on how strong the mayor is or how often the council meets, there can be a lot of executive discretion. And so it's important to keep those same themes that we've talked about the rest of the class about lawmaking authority and executive power. The same powers manifest here at the city level, and that's how I would encourage you to view this. The last general model is what's called a council manager form of city government, and the council manager form, the separation between the legislative power and the executive power is really in the hands of a legislative body, which typically includes a mayor, and then a separate executive body, which includes a city manager. And so what we see in this iteration is the mayor and city council are collectively a singular body that makes up a body legislature. They then appoint kind of different bureaucratic officials to run the state, and they also hire a city manager, and it's really the city manager that carries out the prime executive responsibility or the executive power of the state. And so if I'm looking at a city with a council manager form of government, if I'm curious about who's making the rules, it's really the mayor and the city council that's making the rules. However, if I'm looking at who's carrying out the stuff, who's actually managing the stuff, who's responsible for making sure that the stuff that's supposed to happen is actually happening, that's not actually the city council, that's a city manager. In a lot of these smaller towns with a council manager form, it's the city manager has an astronomically large amount of power, simply because the city council doesn't meet a whole lot. The city council may be a bunch of old timers in that town that really don't kind of understand the nuances of modern law, whatnot. And the city manager really can consume a large, vast amount of authority in a relatively moderate-sized town. Not too long ago, the Killeen city manager was actually uncovered for some financial discrepancies, and the city council kind of paid him off to get him out. It was never clear if he broke the law, if he didn't break the law, and it kind of looked bad for the city of Killeen, but that's the reality of a lot of council manager forms. The council really doesn't always understand fully, intuitively what's going on in the city, and is really dependent upon the city manager for even the decisions that they make. And so in a council manager form, it's really the city manager that we have to look for, not necessarily the council. And so based on what city you're in, it's really important to kind of pay attention to who's actually the mover and shaker in that world. So the city of Killeen, this is taken last fall. And so this is generally the setup. If you look at, we have a city manager. So we know that the city of Killeen works on a council manager form. And we see here Debbie Nash King, the current mayor of Killeen. She is selected as mayor, but she's really part of a mayor council form. Now, Killeen is unique because one of the things that they do is they have members that are elected at large. So if you live in Killeen, you're looking at individuals that are, 3 individuals rather, that are elected based on the entire city of Killeen. And so every Killeen resident gets to elect those individuals, and they get a vote for the mayor. We also have 4 other individuals that are elected based on districts. And these individuals are broken down based on single-member districts throughout Killeen. So Killeen is broken into 4 different areas, and those 4 different areas each get a representative on the city of Killeen City Council. Now, as much as we talk about politics, race and politics, something you'll notice about the Killeen representative is there's a large minority representation in Killeen, and there has been for several years now. And so a lot of the arguments that we have seen in Killeen about undertones of racism, issues of white supremacy, the city council and the actual elected representatives of Killeen have not fit that mold for some time. And so it's kind of important when you begin looking at even accusations of city governments and what's going on and who's calling the shot. Maybe you could say the city council's done, but then some people look at the city manager and say, well, okay, here we have it. So depending on who has the power, who's wielding the power, even those conversations about who's pulling the shots for accusations, a bunch of other stuff really come into an interesting conundrum on, okay, what are we talking about and who actually has the power and do we have any evidence one way or the other? And so a lot of times we have accusations thrown without really a full understanding of how things happen, how they work. And this is a problem for a lot of people. And so this is Killeen. And as you know, Killeen is already set up in 4 different districts. So each one of these districts has a precinct. Now remember, Bell County, very similarly, is broken up into 4 districts for the county. So this is just the city of Killeen. And so this is something that confuses a lot of people because if you're a member of one of these areas, you could be a member of a county commissioner precinct, and then you're a member of a state city council precinct, right? And you would have to keep all of these individual elections and individual places and individual votes going because if I elect you to the city council, that's electing essentially a rule maker for the city of Killeen, and anything they do is not going to extend beyond the boundaries of Killeen. If I'm electing somebody for my precinct for the city or for the county commissioner court, that person is going to help make laws for the entire county, but their lawmaking won't extend beyond the county. And so you really kind of have to begin navigating who am I voting for, what position are they running for, and exactly what power do they have. These are important in the voting, and you can see why a lot of people get very overwhelmed very quickly and decide essentially not to participate in these elections, which is somewhat problematic because these elections are by far the elections that you have the most power in. I've argued for some time, you have the most power in changing things locally. To the extent that you can actually gravitate and get those things changed. And so the power that you have with the vote, it's here. This is where your power is. But because so many people remain ignorant of these elections and of the people voting these elections, we end up denying ourselves a say where theoretically we would have the greatest push. The last thing I want to go over today is what's called special purpose districts. And so the general governing agencies that we go from the counties, and then from the counties we go to the cities, we have this other thing called special purpose districts. They're also called municipal utility districts, which are a type of special purpose districts. And what these do is they serve a collective need in a given area. So effectively, they get together, and if a lot of people in one area get together and say, hey, we currently don't have any fire prevention in our area. Let's band together and create a fire prevention district, and then we all can contribute money to a firehouse, a fire control, something that's going to help build kind of a fire area here. Now, sometimes if you're living within city limits, the city will actually manage the fire. If your city doesn't manage the fire, or if you're not living within city districts, you may not have any kind of fire prevention like a firefighting unit or whatnot in the area. And so a lot of times you may create these special purpose districts. And what happens is the voters in these areas get together and they petition with each other of saying, yes, this is something what we want to do. They set up a charter, they sign it, this is how we're going to run it, this is how we're going to raise money. It gets approved by the state of Texas, and just like a miniature city or running like a city, this new special purpose district runs based on the function of its design. And so these are effectively called hidden government because they don't carry this form of a typical government in the sense that they're not going to have police officers and they're not going to have councils and whatnot, but they are nonetheless effective governments in a lot of different areas. One of the most prominent examples of this is Killeen Independent School Districts or school district. KISD is one of the most powerful governing agents in Central Texas. If you compare the budget of Killeen ISD to the budget of Killeen or Nolanville Hark Heights, overwhelmingly, Killeen ISD manages a far greater swath of territory and a larger budget than any of the local municipalities. And so a lot of people look at the city of Killeen or the city of Nolanville or the city of Hark Heights and kind of ignore the mass of pulling power that Killeen ISD has. And so it's important for you to understand not just the city or the municipality or county you're in, but what are all these other special purpose districts that you're in as well. Because if you live in that district, then you're paying money for a certain benefit in that district. And the question becomes, are you getting your money's worth? Are you actually effectively getting the money for the district that you're in? And so Killeen Independent School District, we actually have a board, the Killeen Independent Board of Directors. They are responsible for hiring the superintendent, which becomes a chief executive officer, and now once again follow the power. So this board right here, they essentially become the lawmakers. They set curriculum standards, they set teacher salary, teacher bonuses, they decide where new schools go, they decide which schools get money, they decide so many of the financial components of the district as well, but they're responsible for putting into play a superintendent. At the top of this, the superintendent, and this is outdated now. John Kraft left this semester, actually. So we've actually elected a new superintendent, or not elected. We don't elect the superintendent. Scratch that. The Board of Trustees, which is elected, the voters in Killeen ISD, they elect the Board of Trustees, and then the Board of Trustees hires a superintendent, and then the managing or the executive responsibility of KISD is carried out by a bunch of executive bureaucrats. Once again, even at a local level, it's going to be the bureaucrats that are carrying out the day-to-day function of government. So a lot of times, even though we go to the Board of Trustees with our complaints and our arguments and whatnot, a lot of times the Board of Trustees doesn't always understand the nuances and sensitivities of everything happening down here, right? It really is kind of an issue where a lot of those bureaucrats end up calling a far greater number of shots, if you will, than sometimes it's originally designed, just because, like I said, making the law has a lot of idealism in it. Carrying that law out tends to look somewhat differently, and it tends to kind of empower individuals that are not elected, that aren't really sometimes qualified for their position, but they're bureaucrats. So they have a degree, they have a qualification, they have whatnot. And every local school district I've ever worked with has this issue. At the end of the day, it's going to be somebody in an office, an HR, tech support, whatever it may be, that's really kind of calling the shots on the day-to-day frustrations that we experience. And so KISD is a great example of what we call a special purpose district. Educational district across the state of Texas fall into this some area. I apologize, my voice is, I've been talking a lot, so just bear with me, we're almost done. Killeen ISD set up here, like I said, this is zoning, so you can see the zoning of the schools, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, which students go to which schools is another important consideration that's decided by the board. Books, curriculum standards, sporting teams, all this is decided by the board. And like I said, this is something you have an incredibly large amount of power in if you choose to exercise it. But even though any student within KISD can go and speak at the board meetings or teachers or whatnot, we very rarely see that happening. You'll have a list of something or a hot topic issue will come out, but on a day-to-day form, a lot of people just don't exercise this power. Here at Central Texas College, we have a very similar setup. We have a board of directors, and they are responsible for primarily the lawmaking on campus. They set curriculum rates and tuition rates and tax revenue, and they work with the bureaucrats on campus to decide what is the proper kind of governing of her. They hire a chancellor, and that chancellor becomes a chief executive officer. Mr. Yiannopoulos is on his way out, and Dr. Carter is on her way in as we begin transitioning this semester legislature with the new chancellor. But again, this is a special purpose district. If you live in the community college district of Central Texas College and you get to come to college here for a lesser price, it's a benefit we provide those who pay taxes to our school district. If you're not in the CTC school district area, you have to pay a heightened tuition. And a lot of that goes into the fact of how these special purpose districts are run and organized and manage themselves. And so just like Killeen ISD, CTC is one of these kind of localities that is a governing locality. Across the state of Texas, there are several other community college districts. You can see some of them look like the counties they're in, some of them do not. Each one of these districts is independently set up, independently run. They have to be sanctioned by the state of Texas. They do get accreditation through regional accreditation and state accreditation. They have to govern themselves and keep their legitimacy. But at the end of the day, a lot of these community colleges are going to be set up a little differently. They're going to be run a little differently, and they're going to manage themselves a little differently because of the authority that Texas does allow for these localities. And so regardless of where you end up going, you're going to kind of see a different thing, right? This is another one that we talk about. The MUDs, or municipal utility districts, are a form of special purpose districts. This is something I took, Bell County Water Control District. If you ever seen anything by Bell CWCID, that's the Bell County Control and Improvement District. In other words, who's actually controlling your water, where your water comes from, how it comes from. You can even go, there is standards here that are required. They actually have to flag on if you have any issues in the water. You can go to their website. And as a municipal district that's required to kind of be accountable to the public, you can actually go and see what are the concerns in your water. Have they actually recognized any toxins in your water lately? You'll be surprised if you actually go to their website and start poking around how many violations or water flags have been happening in the last 2 or 3 years. And so the WCID is another one of these things that's a local utility district, special purpose district. You pay money to them in the form of fees and a water bill and whatnot, and they in turn provide a service. Counties fall into that and a bunch of other stuff. And so when you start looking at Texas government, one of the difficulties of Texas government is just how it's functioning, to the point of really looking at how many levels of government you really need to pay attention to and how far the rabbit hole goes. And like I said many, many times before, you are most powerful in the elections closest to you. And we really exercise our power when we understand how to exercise it, because when we vote in a presidential election, the vote we cast is astronomically weakened in power because so many people vote in those elections. When you vote in a school board election, your vote is eminently more powerful. And that's kind of the real benefit of understanding Texas government and really using your power in a meaningful way, right? I'm going to leave you there for this week. I'll check in with you next week as we dive in a little bit more on what is the concept of justice and how justice is played out in Texas historically. Until then,